Another Windows-based application control is user account control, or UAC as people generally tend to call it. By default, UAC is automatically enabled from Windows Vista and above. The goal of UAC is to make it possible for users to run as a standard user, so not as an administrator, but yet still allow that standard user to perform admin tasks. And as we know, it's always best to run as a standard user and not as an administrator. So this is Microsoft's solution to try to get people not to run as admin. Has it been successful? No, not so much. So if we scroll down here a little bit, there's a list there. So when the user performs certain tasks, and you can see the ones here like running an application as an administrator, changes to system-wide settings, or to files in system root or program files, installing and uninstalling applications, you will get one of these, which I'm sure you're very familiar with if you've been running Windows operating systems. This is a warning to let you know that a privileged type activity is happening, and do you want to give permission to it? In the early Vista version of UAC, people found the constant pop-ups too annoying. So by Windows 7, they trimmed down those triggers, that trigger list that I've just shown you. But most people just simply click OK when it pops up because they're just so used to seeing it. It isn't really recognized in the mind as a warning that something might be wrong. So it can offer somewhat little protection in the real world in cases where people are just click happy, and most often people are quite click happy. It can, of course, prevent some malware, some types of attacks and hackers, or at least slow them down. But any good malware, especially if it's written for Windows, should be written to work around it. And I guess some malware will just rely on people just to click yes anyway. It is configurable. I'll show you how to configure it. If you go down to Start and then just type UAC, and then you'll find here you've got Change User Account Settings. Click on there. There are actually kind of three options. So we have the recommended option, which is always notify me when programs try to install software or make changes to my computer. I make changes to Windows settings. But if we come down to this one, it's don't notify me when I make changes to Windows settings. So that's the difference really between these two. So when you do anything, it won't notify you. But the thing is, attackers' malware run as you quite often. So therefore, really, it's useful if you are notified of any change that you do. And then this option here is really exactly the same as the other one, but it just won't dim the screen. Now really there's no point in selecting that unless for some reason your machine takes a long time to dim the screen because of some sort of graphics issue. So essentially they're pretty much the same. And then this is off. So those are your options really. Obviously recommended is to be here, unless of course you're using some other controls in order to mitigate attacks. Any malware or attacker, of course, that gains admin privileges can simply disable UAC, and they do. It is recommended to run as a standard user, as you know, as I've mentioned. For security, you do want UAC to remain on the always notify, as I've said, to add that additional layer of protection. When running as a standard user, you have the option to right click and run as an administrator, which is another form of application control. So right click, and then you have the option here to run as an administrator. I'm an administrator at the moment, but if I was not, I have the option here to run as an administrator. So that's UAC.